Dressed in full combat gear, Azimio leader Raila Odinga, today, 9th March 2023, declared, launched mass action countrywide, as he had threatened about 14 days ago. It was an anticlimax for many supporters of Azimio on the ground, who are in a big hurry. They want quick action. They want things to change immediately. Of course, many of them have not sat down to consider the tactical advantage of drawing an opponent into a long fought out battle with different battles and different battlegrounds, rather than just presenting them with one that when it is quashed, then it is all over. I believe some of you have understood what I'm saying. Because this appears to be exactly what Raila Odinga's strategy is, which is now beginning to emerge a little more clearer. Because the Azimio chaps have so far played their cards very close to their chests. Now, before we break down what all this means, I want to bring to your attention that on this very same day that Raila launched mass action, there were a few very interesting appointments, actually two, by the Ruto administration. That of Monica Juma, who is already the National Security Advisor, a very new post in Kenya. We've never had it before. But in places like the United States of America, it is a well-known position. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. Monica Juma has been appointed Secretary to the National Security Council. Now, this is the topmost security organ as per our constitution. Yeah. The president of the country and the deputy normally sit on this council. Indeed, it is the president who chairs meetings. To summarize it neatly, this is the council that takes care of peace in the country and defense against foreign aggressors. The other people who sit on that council include the head of the National Intelligence Service and other security heads. Now, the significance of Monica Juma's appointment as secretary to this council means, and this is very significant, she'll be sitting in these meetings of the top security organ in the country. The second appointment is even more interesting. It is that of former Police Inspector General Joseph Boynet as Monica Juma's deputy. In other words, he is going to be the Deputy National Security Advisor. Now, for those who understand security matters, this is super fascinating. Boynet has got a lot of experience in our security organs, much more than Monica Juma. Indeed, Boynet started out in our intelligence service for many years in a very senior position, but now is deputy of Monica Juma. Now, those who followed the elections, and especially the UDA nominations prior to last August's elections, will remember that Bwana Boynet lost a nomination to UDA and was very bitter about it. Yeah. He told everybody who could give him an ear that he had been rigged out. In fact, during the general elections, so injured was Boynet. You spend a lot of money in these nominations, and then you lose and you think you've lost unfairly. So bitter was Bwana Boynet that he did not campaign for UDA. Okay? Now, these appointments are not only significant, but they're also very relevant to the mass action. How so? I can hear you ask. It is because these are going to be key Ruto point women and point men in dealing with whatever Azimio and Raila Odinga can throw at the government during this period of mass action. And it is even more interesting when you consider that Boynet has been brought in to help the administration to use force to deal with the mass action. He has a lot of experience in that. I refer you back to the 2017 elections and what followed, especially after the Supreme Court ruling and the boycott of Raila Odinga for the presidential rerun, the repeat of the presidential elections. So this tells us very clearly what the strategy of the government will be in dealing with Raila and company. My guess is that Monica Juma's role will be mainly as a coordinator. She knows her way around the Department of Defense. She's a former PS there. She knows her way very well around the internal docket. She was a PS there. So, in my opinion, she will coordinate decisions made, and I believe those decisions will be very firm and designed to use force against Azimio as much as possible. So Monica Juma will be coordinating all that so as to quicken action. The whole idea here is to make sure that the administration acts very quickly and should expect anything and should be ready to deal with it quickly. I believe that's the whole strategy. All this information is important so that we have an idea of what to expect going forward. I believe I don't need to say that we have entered a very dangerous territory in our country, and a very dangerous time too. Based on how the Ruto administration is preparing itself, and based on the determination of Azimio to move forward, there is no way we can avoid a confrontation. And in that confrontation, anything can happen. You know, this is the exact situation that former President Uhuru Kenyatta was faced with in 2017. However, as we are often reminded, Uhuru is not Ruto. Because we know former President Uhuru avoided a prolonged confrontation and instead went for a handshake, which carried the country through up to last August when we held the elections, or selections according to some people. And because Ruto is not Uhuru, he will not shy away from a prolonged confrontation. That's the problem. And so far in Ruto's career, he has shown us again and again that to him, the end justifies the means. If you get what I'm trying to say. And so Kenyans must brace themselves for what must come. But I dare add that the end of this, or the end of this confrontation, is extremely predictable. Now you may be surprised at that statement. But you see, we're in Raila Odinga territory. When Raila Odinga is with the masses, when Raila Odinga is working the masses, nobody else does it better. And you can be sure that in the end, whatever happens, the masses and Raila Odinga will carry the day. Now the only question on the minds of most close analysts is at what price? Because it is very clear, and we have seen this again and again, that despite propaganda from UDA bloggers and handlers of the Ruto administration that Raila is looking for handshake, despite that propaganda, it is very clear that this time round there will be no handshake. Indeed, the biggest danger here, which I see, is that what happened in 2017 will happen again. And that is, Raila Odinga supporters will take over. In 2017, Raila Odinga diehards took over and forced a swearing in at Uhuru Park. If and when they take over this time round, nobody knows what they can force. But I believe most of us have a pretty good idea. But in my opinion, the biggest problem the Ruto administration has is that this is 2023. And 2023 is not 2017. In 2017, life in Kenya was good. People were complaining, but they had money in their pockets. People were complaining, but they had jobs, they had livelihoods. They had a lot to lose. And still we saw what happened. But now in 2023, it makes 2017 look like a golden period in Kenyan history, when things were so good compared to the situation today. That is the biggest problem the Ruto administration has. There are way too many people with nothing to lose. There is something else that is very different this time around. In 2017, it was mainly just Raila Odinga versus the Uhuru Kenyatta administration. In 2023, it is Raila Odinga and his supporters, Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka and his supporters, Martha Karua and his supporters, Professor Wajakoya and his supporters, etc., etc. It is a whole different ballgame, and I fear that the Ruto administration has no idea of what's coming. Something has been happening on our Weekly Intelligence Briefings forum, where it is clear that supporters of UDA believe that this is a Raila problem. And so they're throwing barbs at Raila. They're throwing barbs at the Luo community, completely oblivious of the fact that this thing is not tribal. Very far from it. It is a national outcry from those who voted for Raila Odinga right across the country. And indeed, the masses who almost brought down our media stations. Oh yes. You will remember that shortly after the results were announced, and especially shortly after the Supreme Court pronounced itself, many Kenyans boycotted the media, TV stations, radio stations, etc., etc. And the result was devastating. Our media houses were already bleeding, hardly surviving. But the mass boycott of those who voted as Azimio was enough to almost bring our media houses to their knees. It is very instructive and super fascinating that the launch by Raila and Azimio of the protests, of the rallies, have had a positive impact on our media houses. What does that tell you? Azimio supporters are many, and obviously, very obviously, the vast majority. That is clearly the truth. Would you feel comfortable with so many people, so many millions, supporting an idea which you're opposed to? And you're opposed to this idea with so few? Would you be comfortable? I think you get my drift. That is the problem the Ruto administration has to face. And it is difficult to see a way out. Well, so far, it looks like they have decided to use the brute force of the government. And it is true, a government can be very intimidating. However, not to so many people. No way. It can be intimidating to a small group of people, or people who are not in the majority. But when you're dealing with the majority of Kenyans, you need to ask Bashir, former president of Sudan, and many other world leaders who used brute force, who felt that brute force would protect them, but found out when it was too late that it was not adequate. Going forward, I think we can expect a lot of disruptions to our lives as the strikes take effect, the demonstrations, the picketing, the boycott of certain products and services, etc., etc. We can expect a lot of disruptions in our lives. And this comes at a time when the country is already facing some very serious problems. The famine. There's been no rain in Kenya for some time now. The shortage of US dollars, which is very biting. And definitely, 1 week, 2 weeks down the road, Kenya will be a very different country. Let's put the demonstrations aside, assuming there were no demonstrations, there was no mass action. 2 weeks down the road already, Kenya was going to be a very different country. And so, one can only wonder what will happen now when there's a combination of factors, the problems facing us, and then also the mass action at the same time. What? Now, in his speech today, Raila Odinga had no breaks. He went back even into Ruto's past. He mentioned 2007. He mentioned the ICC cases and the disappearance and the murder of ICC witnesses. Witnesses to the ICC case involving Ruto. The tone set by the Azimio leader clearly tells us that there's no going back. God Almighty help Kenya. Until next time, this is Chris. Kumekucha.